Hello friends, welcome back to Aunt Debbie's Boutique. This is the last in our series of the corner star quilt that we're making. The pattern is by Missouri Star Quilts. And I have all my quilt blocks done. I'm thrilled with how they turned out. I found this a very easy pattern to sew. I have them laid out here on the table. And I'm going to change up the pattern a little bit because you know why? It's my quilt and I can make it any way I want, and so can you. This calls for sashing, real narrow, about 1 inch. Well, I think you cut it 1.5 inch sashing between all the blocks, and it's the background fabric. But I kind of like the secondary patterns that are forming between the blocks. And so I have decided not to put any sashing in mine and to just make it without it. Another thing it calls for is it is 4 by 4 rows by 4 blocks. And that makes a square quilt. And I find that to be a little bit of an awkward size. Everybody in my family is real tall. I'm 5'10" and my daughter's 6'2", so we like things long if we're going to use them. And so I have decided to make my quilt 3 blocks by 5 blocks. That is almost, time I put a border on it, it is almost the size of a twin. Not quite, but it'll be big enough and it will function great to curl up on the couch with. So I've made those changes. If you want to make yours exactly like the pattern, you are welcome to do that, putting sashing in. It's not that difficult. We did it on our last quilt, on our sampler quilt, and we'll do it on some more quilts in the future. So I'm just going to skip it on this one just because I like the way it looks without it. I am going to still put the border on. I think it needs a border, and I'm going to put a small cream border around it, and then I've got some of the green fabric to put on the outside border. Okay, I'm going to pick these up in order and take them over to the machine so I can sew them together. I do have 1 block left over because 3 by 5 is just 15 blocks instead of the 16, but I'll make a pillow or something with that. So let's go over to the sewing machine and get these sewed together. Okay, as I iron each row, one row I'm going to iron the seams this direction, the next row this direction, so that they will nest together. And I went back, I had told you it didn't matter which direction you ironed the final seams on these, and that's true if you're doing sashing. But since I wasn't doing sashing, I went back and ironed all of the red ones one way and all of the blue ones another way so that they would nest. And you have to be careful. These blocks can be turned any direction too. So let's hope I've got all mine turned right. And I'm just setting my seam. And then this row, I hope I turned it the right way. I think it goes like this. I'm gonna iron all my seams this direction. I did not chain these when I was sewing them together because I was afraid I'd get them out of order. It was just easier for me to do them one at a time and keep them in order. Now that I've got them all ironed, I still have them stacked in the direction that I want them to go. I'm going to take them back over to the sewing machine and sew the rows together. Well, friends, here is all the blocks sewn together. I don't know if I like it as well as I would have if I'd put the sashing in it or not, but I like it, so I'm going to leave it this way. Now, I finished sewing this, putting this together 2 weeks ago, and the video you've just been watching was made 2 weeks ago. Once I had it put together, I started feeling bad, and I thought I'll lay down for a while and then I'll finish the video. And laying down for a while became about 2 weeks because I tested positive for COVID the next day. So I thank you for your patience in waiting on this last video in this series. I am not 100%, but I feel pretty good. I just don't have much energy. So now it's time to finish it up, and we'll put the borders on it. So let's take it over to the sewing machine and the ironing board area and measure it for our borders. All right, we're back at the ironing table, and I have my quilt kind of draped here, and I just got finished measuring the long side of it, and I measured it on both sides and down the middle, so lengthwise, and I came up with measurements of 81 3/4, 82, and 82 1/8. So the median point in that is 82, and that's what I'm going to use for my border. And we're going to make it all fit just by tugging or stretching and squeezing a little bit, so that our quilt, when it's done, is perfectly rectangular. Now I'm just going to use a real small border of this background print, and then after that I'm going to put a large border of this green print around it. So I have already cut 2 pieces. This is 2 inches wide. So once we have a 1/4 inch seam on each side, it's going to be 1.5 inches wide. That's not what the pattern called for. That's just what I'm doing. And it did call for 1, but I think it may have been a little bit narrower than this. I'm not sure. I can't remember. Anyway, you can follow the pattern directions, or you can make up your own with. I'm trying to get this to come out to a decent size for a twin bed. Okay. Once we've determined that both sides are going to be 82 inches, I'm going to take my border. I'm going to line it up perfectly here on one end and pin it, and then I'm going to go all the way down, keeping it straight. To the other end and line it up perfectly there. Now, I don't think my arms will stretch 82 inches, so I'm going to grab both ends in one hand and find the center just by tugging it like this. The center of both of them, and I'm going to pin it right there. Now I'll just work on one side at a time, and I'm just going to give it a little tug till everything is nice and smooth, and then I'll pin it a few times, but I will tug on a little bit as I sew to make sure it all comes out like I want it to in between pins. Okay, that's one half of it done. Take the other half, of which it's twisted. I thought I had that straight, but I didn't. So I'll repin that. Give it a little tug. That didn't seem to affect it at all, so. Pin it in a few places. Okay, I'm going to take it over to the sewing machine, and when I sew, I'm going to sew from this side just so I can make sure and have all my seams laying down the way I want them to. It's just easier to keep an eye on them if you do it on that side. And I'm also going to pin this other side before I go over there, and I will sew both of them at the same time. So I'll get this pinned and you meet me at the sewing machine. Okay, a couple things I'd like to point out is, one, always stop and take out your pins. Do not run over them. You can break a pin, you can get your machine out of line. It's just not worth it. So always do that. And if you'll notice, I'm using my 1/4 inch foot to make this seam. Now, I don't always use this, got some threads in it, because I find it makes a pretty big 1/4 inch seam, and I like to use a scant one, but on the border it's not going to matter. And I mean, it doesn't matter what size seam you put in it as long as you're consistent. And so I use this to make sure my seam width stayed as consistent as possible. And the reason for that is, once we've squared this quilt up, made both sides the exact same length and the top and the bottom the exact same length, when we go to put our next border on, it should be pretty square. We shouldn't have much variation. We shouldn't have any variation at all, but we all know that that doesn't always happen. So that's just one more way of getting our quilt nice and square, or really rectangular. Okay, let's iron it and measure for the top and the bottom. Okay, I went ahead and ironed it before I turned the camera back on, and you want to iron the seam towards the border because there aren't any other seams there that will get in the way, and it just will lay smoother. So we have both of the long sides stitched on, and I measured it from across the top across the bottom and across the middle, and I got 52 inches every time. That doesn't happen often, but it did this time, so I'm pleased with that. So I went ahead and cut 2 strips 52 inches long to sew on the top and bottom. I tell you, strings are the bane of my existence. They're everywhere, and all I do is cut them off and pick them off. I failed to mention that the way I made these binding strips is I cut 2-inch strip across the width of the fabric, which will give you about a 42-inch strip of fabric. I cut 7 of them. I sewed them all together with just, let me see if I can find a seam. Yeah, just a flat seam like that. And I didn't do an angular one or anything. And then I ironed it to one side. So then I would cut the strips as needed. I'm doing the same thing for the big border. I cut 7 strips. They're 6 inches wide. Okay. Once again, whoa, throwing things here. More string. We're going to pin both ends with the right sides together. And lining them up perfectly on the end. I should be pinning on the other side. And then my arms will stretch 52 inches, so I'm tugging the whole thing, picking a point in the middle, pinning it. I'll pin it from this side because that's the side I'm going to be sewing from. Then between the 2 pins, tug a little bit. You really shouldn't have to tug much just to smooth it out because it's the correct size. Okay, I'll finish pinning this part, then I'll do the bottom, pin the bottom, and I'll meet you back over at the sewing machine. We have our first border on both directions. Now, unless the pattern instructions tell you differently, it's always a good idea to do the long side first, which would be this one, I'm sorry, and then come back and do the top and the bottom, or the shorter side. That just keeps you from having a real lengthy strip on the side, on the long sides. Now the next thing we need to do is put on our outside border, and we'll be done with the quilt top. Now this is going to be done exactly the same way. I'm going to measure my long sides first on both the right and the left side, and once down the middle, and I'll pick a median cut my strips. First I got to sew all my strips together. Cut my strips to that length and sew both sides. Then do the same for the top and bottom. It's exactly like the first border we did. So I'm not going to put you through all that again. I will go take care of that, and then I will meet you at my dining room table so we can look at the entire quilt top. Okay friends, the quilt top is all put together. It's too big to put on my dining room table. I should probably lay it on a bed to display it, but I'll kind of pull it over to the other side so maybe you can see. Looks like it's kind of bunched up right there a little bit. But I'm going to take it to my ironing board, get out my big ironing board and iron it, steam iron it real well. And then I'm going to put it in the to be quilted pile. I haven't decided exactly how I'm going to quilt it, whether I'm going to have it done or do it myself, but I'm thinking about trying it myself. And it'll have to go into a pile for when there's time. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed making this quilt along with me. I really like the pattern and like how it turned out. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I will find a good home for it at some point. I'm also going to take all of these videos, I think there's 4 of them, and compile them together for a one long video for people who don't want to jump around and try to find each video. So when that comes out, know that you've already seen all the individual ones, if you have, and it's just a compilation for easy reference. I have a lot of fun things planned. Some of them are going to get pushed aside because of being sick. I had several Easter projects I wanted to do, and I think I'm only going to have time to do maybe one of them before Easter. So we'll do that. And I got my sampler quilt back from the long arm quilter, and it is absolutely gorgeous. I could not be happier with it. So I'll have a video coming up real soon showing you how to do the binding on that and showing you the final result. So I hope you will tune in in a few days for my next video, and thank you for your patience while I was recovering from COVID. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, comment, whatever you can do. It helps my channel. I appreciate each and every one of you. And remember, whatever you do, do it to the glory of the Lord. Thank you.